Hollow Man. So with everyone talking about Lee Wannell's The Invisible Man, released through Blumhouse, major hit, major success, been out on the home market for a while, there's growing interest in the other big budget studio Invisible Man movie that came out just shy of 20 years ago. It was around 2001, I believe. So this movie was called Hollow Man, which was a title they actually had to buy from T.S. Eliot, I believe. So, and his thing was like, it wasn't even called Hollow Man, it was called Hollow Men, and it had nothing to do with an invisible man psychopath, but whatever, I guess they had the money to spend and wanted to make sure they didn't get sued. But this flick, it's entertaining, it's fine, it's directed by Paul Verhoeven, and it's kind of a mid-level movie for him. It's not his best, it's far from his worst. But the thing is that if you watch the movie, what you can't help but notice is that this is a B movie with an A movie's production. Like, this is an A-level production of a B-grade script. It's not a great script, it's not a bad script, it's just, this thing should not have had almost $100 million budget.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, Ed. Your team's in early today. Something special going on? Sorry, Ed. You know the rules.
If we're gonna move forward, this is the next logical step.
I'm ready for you.
Are you sure?
Positive. Here goes nothing.
The movie is directed by Paul Verhoeven. Paul Verhoeven was a major name at the time. He had done a string of hits from the late 80s to the early 90s after arriving to America. The man's from the Netherlands. Robocop, Total Recall, Striptease. Not Striptease. Basic Instinct. Was it Basic Instinct? Yeah, Basic Instinct. The one where she spreads her legs and you see her vagina. That movie, which is really what that movie's known for. It's actually not a very good movie, but it was a colossal hit, pretty much because it was kind of an attempt to release a porno as a mainstream movie. And then he got a little bolder and tried to make more or less a straight-up porno with showgirls, and that was a disaster. You know, that killed his winning streak right there. Then he bounced back a little bit with Starship Troopers, which was more of a cult hit than a legitimate hit, but it was well-liked by his fans. Then he, he was a bit adrift in Hollywood. He'd had nothing but success. Like I said, Robocop and Total Recall are legendary movies. They're going to be remembered for a very long time, if not forever. Basic Instinct, I keep wanting to call it Striptease. I have no idea why. Basic Instinct was a big hit, even though it wasn't a very good movie. And then, Showgirls was one of the most roundly mocked movies of the 1990s. It's a legend of bad filmmaking at this point. He was not the guy to direct that movie. He is not a guy who excels at doing that kind of filmmaking. And Starship Troopers was good, but it was a little too quirky for the audience. Honestly, if they'd had a big name attached to that, like a real star, that movie might have been more successful. But because they went for unknowns at the time, I think that hurt it a little bit with audiences, and it was already a little bit of a tough sell because it was so strange. It's a great movie, though. But after that, he needed a job, and I kind of feel like he wanted one last big payday before he went back to Europe. Which is what happened. He did Hollow Man and then went back to Europe. He shows no signs of coming back to the US. His next few projects are going to be done in Europe. His last three projects were all European. Black Book, Elle, which actually got him some Academy Award recognition, and something in between. I think it was called Traitor. I know nothing about that movie. But yeah, Hollow Man, he said he did, and he felt like a sellout afterward because he didn't really have anything to say with the movie, and you can kind of tell his heart's not in it. This is a very visually bland movie, which is weird to say because the special effects in this movie are actually really good for the most part. They were groundbreaking at the time. This was when CGI was finally moving from bad. If you look at most 90s CGI is awful. You have a few outliers, like Jurassic Park movies, their CGI is usually pretty good. That's Spielberg. But most of the 90s CGI just looked terrible. But around 2000, George Lucas and a few other people were really starting to put work into it, really pushing the creators to do more with it, and it was starting to look better. And while making a guy invisible today sounds like nothing, it's a few keystrokes. In the early 2000s, the way they removed Kevin Bacon from this movie was revolutionary. It was amazing. The ability to have him in the mask, where he's wearing this rubber mask and the eye holes in the mouth are empty. You know, hence the title, The Hollow Man, because the mask makes it looks like a hollow mask. That was amazing. The ability to have things stuck to him when he's invisible. So, you know, it looks like this thing is just hanging in midair. That was all very impressive at the time. So, yeah, the effects work is great, but the locations are just uninspired as hell. It's a very visually dull movie. Yeah, the lab, it takes place primarily in an underground laboratory, and it's the most uninspired whatever set you can imagine. I mean, it looks almost like something out of a Power Rangers episode or something. I'm sorry, I can't come up with anything more recent. I don't watch children's shows. Gotta reach all the way back to the 90s when I was watching kids shows, but it's just a lab. It's a very boring set. The main character, played by Kevin Bacon, Sebastian, his apartment is just an apartment. There's nothing visually interesting about the location. Even the building that houses the lab, because it's an underground lab, but the building they have to go through is just a warehouse. It looks like a found location you'd use on a low-budget movie, and this script honestly kind of feels like it should have been budgeted at around $20 million, which, you know, would have limited the effects they could do, but it doesn't feel like a script that deserved an A-level production. It's the characters are kind of weak, it has pacing issues, and the last 10 minutes of the movie are downright silly. More about that later. But yeah, and this isn't a bad movie. I'm not trashing the movie. Like I said, I find this flick entertaining. I watch it every couple of years. And I'm a big Kevin Bacon fan, though, so that's helps add to my enjoyment of it. He's great in it. The funny thing about that is that when he read the script, he assumed this would be a very easy movie to make. He figured, oh, I'm just going to be in a booth reading. I'm invisible. I'm not even going to need to be on set. Like, oh no, you're going to be in something called a motion capture suit with contact lenses to make your eyes easier to disappear too. He ended up being one of the hardest jobs he'd ever had. So that's great. But so essentially, Kevin Bacon plays a scientist named Sebastian Kane, I think is his last name, who's working on an invisibility serum. He's managed to make animals invisible, but he can't quite bring them back once they're invisible. They tend to melt, and that part's pretty cool. So, and he works for the Pentagon.
So, what's it like being a ghost?
Ghost or dead? I'm very much alive.
He's got a team working for him. The team includes his ex-girlfriend, who's played by Elizabeth Shue. She's best known now for her role on the Amazon series The Boys. Cats won the attention. But she is an Oscar-nominated actress, and she's good in the movie. Josh Brolin, and this was actually one of his first big, like, A-tier leading roles. Up until this point, he had mostly done supporting roles in smaller movies. And Kim Dickens, Greg Grunberg, and two other people whose names I don't know off the top of my head. But the actors are fine. I will say Josh Brolin's a little miscast, but he's not bad in it. He doesn't look like a scientist. They kind of do this Clark Kent thing with his hair and give him the nerd glasses, but he looks like an athlete. He doesn't look like a scientist. And he's also kind of young for the role. He looks like he's about 32, which isn't that young, but everyone else looks older than him. And he's supposed to be kind of a team leader type guy. But, and Kim Dickens is really good in this movie. Kim Dickens, mostly know her from Deadwood. She was on Deadwood for a while, and the Bruce Willis movie Mercury Rising, where he's protecting the autistic boy from evil Alec Baldwin. Kim Dickens is really good. Again, the acting isn't the problem. The problem is that none of these characters are very interesting. We don't really motivate Kevin Bacon. He just wants to make this invisibility serum. Does he want it for any particular reason? We don't really know. We don't even really know how he sold this to the Pentagon. He works for the Pentagon. He works for a guy played by William Devane, William Devane's a famous character actor. He did a lot of stuff in the 70s, 80s, even into the 2000s. He actually starred in one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite movies, Rolling Thunder. Tarantino liked that movie so much that he named his production company after it, Rolling Thunder Pictures. I saw that movie. I didn't think it was all that great, but Tarantino's kind of got weird taste. Then again, so do I. So, who knows? But William Devane, so he works for William Devane, and they're supposed to have this relationship, like Kevin Bacon and William Devane's characters are. But the most we get out of him is he was a student of his, and that's about it. The most we get out of Kevin Bacon and Elizabeth Shue is that they were dating, and then they broke up because he was too interested in his work, which kind of is... He feels like it needs more explanation because they work together. So you'd feel like maybe they could have just bonded over work, but because he never seems like a terribly professional guy. He's actually very unprofessional, especially for a team leader. He makes dirty jokes. He's constantly hitting on the women that work for him. So yeah, he I don't know. Like I said, they don't really motivate any of these characters very well. And Elizabeth Shue is good in this movie. Elizabeth Shue's career never quite got off the ground, and I think that a big part of that is that it wasn't helpful for her to be taken seriously as an actress when her most famous roles were as a babysitter and a hooker. And she's good as a scientist. She's believable. She's a very attractive blonde woman, but she is believable. She sells it, and that's actually kind of ironic because she had gotten terrible reviews for playing a scientist just a few years before this in a movie called The Saint with Val Kilmer. And she's so bad in that movie that the movie's marketing actually sort of sold it as a fun, bad movie after a while because everyone hated it. And they were showing these clips of her trying to explain scientific experiments, and it sounds like a college freshman reading out of a textbook and not knowing what they're saying. The Saint is a terrible movie. But she's good. As I said, Josh Brolin's good in it. He has this rivalry thing running with Kevin Bacon, but they never really pay that off. It's just... They're just kind of professional rivals, but it's not an intense rivalry or anything. They just kind of like to buck with each other. And really, it feels like Josh Brolin probably should have played like a security guard, or maybe the animal wrangler. In the movie, Kim Dickens is the animal wrangler. Maybe he should have been the animal wrangler. That would have worked better. And then Kevin Bacon could be irritated that he's more physically fit and more of a man's man than he is. But this whole thing they have where this game of who's smarter doesn't really sell because it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't matter to the plot. You could remove that entire element. Even the fact that Josh Brolin is now dating Elizabeth Shue, she's Kevin Bacon's character's ex, doesn't really add anything. And then the supporting cast, Kim Dickens' character is likable, and she plays the role with a lot of personality. So does Greg Grunberg, actually. He's kind of funny, but we don't know anything about any of these people. They're just kind of nerdy. I mean, I guess that's sort of a quality the movie does, is that at least the supporting cast, anyway, look kind of like nerds, so they kind of feel like they'd actually be doing this job as opposed to filling it with models like some movies would do. But yeah, so essentially Kevin Bacon makes himself invisible, then he can't make himself visible again, and since they didn't even have clearance to go into human trials, Kevin Bacon just did this. Sebastian wanted to be the first one to do it because he felt that the experiment was reaching its end, and he wanted, it's implied that he really just wanted to make sure his name was going to be in the history books. So he becomes invisible, and the movie does this kind of cool thing where you disappear by layers. So your skin, muscle, tissue, then finally bone. It disappears like that. So that was kind of a cool gag. It looks good. It's a good special effect, even though the skinless effect is pretty dated. It's the most dated effect in the movie by far, is when they just appear to be skinless, because that does just look like CG. It doesn't look photoreal at all. But aside from that, it's good. And Kevin Bacon plays the role very well. He starts out as this kind of quirky but likable guy. He has this thing where he's stuck a sign to his ceiling that says, "You should be working," because he zones out his computer, he leans back in his chair, and he sees the sign that says, "You should be working." He really likes Twinkies. I assume Twinkies probably had some sort of product placement deal with this. I hate Twinkies. It tastes like rubber. He has this pretty neighbor girl that he likes to spy on, played by Radha Mitchell, Rhoda Mitchell. This was actually a breakthrough role for her. And she doesn't even have a name. I believe her character is called Neighbor Girl, but she's very beautiful in this movie. And she does nudity, and that people took notice of it. And she looks a lot like Kate Beckinsale. She's actually kind of, in the 2000s, was sort of the poor woman's Kate Beckinsale, I guess you'd say. She looks a lot like her. She just looks like really tan Kate Beckinsale. She actually starred in the only Underworld movie that Kate Beckinsale didn't star in. And she's done a lot of TV work too. And she was in that movie Doomsday with Malcolm McDowell, that really crazy one Neil Marshall directed that was kind of a mashup of Mad Max, 28 Days Later, Camelot. Yeah, it was a weird movie. But, so he spies on this pretty neighbor girl. And he wears weird suits. He listens to hard rock and this I believe it's a Porsche, like a really expensive sports car. Yeah, so he's a likable character, but the longer he's invisible, the more his temper kind of goes off. It's implied that he can't really sleep because his eyelids are translucent. And I assume that maybe because... So they have to work in dark, and he can never sleep. He's always tossing and turning. He's constantly having tests done on him and trying to figure out why the serum won't work on him, because they've got it to work on animals, so they could make the animals come back from invisible to visible, but it won't work on him. He just stays invisible. So he gets worse and he gets worse. Then he finally snaps. The movie's famous tagline that was all over the marketing is, "It's amazing what you can do when you don't have to look yourself in the mirror anymore." And Kevin Bacon plays the role of Sebastian very well. He's a charismatic actor, but he's also a very good villain. His best villain was probably Sleepers. Although Trapped, which is a very underappreciated movie he did with Charlize Theron, where he kidnaps her daughter, played by Dakota Fanning, he's a really good bad guy in that too. This isn't his best bad guy role, but this is a good movie, and it's a good role for him. It's just not a great movie. Okay, it's a good movie, but it's not a very good script. It's written by a guy named Andrew Marlowe, and Marlowe also wrote Air Force One with Harrison Ford, which you may remember as What If Die Hard was about the President of the United States, where Gary Oldman hijacks the president's plane, Air Force One, and the President of the United States starts kicking terrorist ass. And End of Days, which is that Schwarzenegger movie where Schwarzenegger has to fight the devil. And even though it's been a while since I saw either of those movies, I remember both of them being better written than this movie. This flick, it takes way too long to get to where you know it's going. You know Kevin Bacon's going to go dark side. You just have to wait until he does. And the only real motivation for him to do it is that he realizes he can get away with it. We don't really know if he was a bad guy all along. There's even a line later on in the movie, what fucked you up? Was it the serum or the power? So it's about halfway through the movie before he finally becomes a bad guy. And what he does is he breaks into Rona Mitra's apartment. The pretty neighbor girl he kind of spies on. And it looks like he rapes her. But in the full scene, he does rape her, but they cut part of that out. So halfway through the movie, you can tell what he did to her, whether it shows it or not. So there's not really any point in this game the movie keeps playing of whether or not he's a danger, because he clearly is. There's this kind of Me Too thing going. I know this is way before the Me Too movement, but there's this kind of Me Too thing going throughout the movie where he's very inappropriate with the women that work for him. One of the first things he does once he becomes invisible is he sexually assaults Kim Dickens in her sleep. He unbuttons her blouse and kind of plays with her. Then at one point, he just straight up lifts up Elizabeth Shue's skirt. Like he's not behaving appropriately, and the idea that this guy would become a bad guy isn't that shocking. So you're really just waiting for the inevitable. So the movie's third act, which is where he decides to kill the whole team, basically kill everybody that knew about what he done, probably should have happened at the halfway point. It shouldn't have taken that long to get to that point. A lot of people who reviewed this said it's just a glorified slasher movie. And the end of the movie does kind of become that, especially given that this guy is supposed to be a brilliant scientist, but he goes about taking out his team like he's Jason Voorhees, like he's come at him to strangle them, and he's stabbing people with shit. And, it feels like this is a self-contained laboratory. He probably could have just gassed everybody. He probably could have just turned the air off or something. He poisoned the water. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he'd be climbing around on pipes in the ceiling to grab people by the throat. Again, like Michael Myers, like Jason. And then, heavy spoilers from here on out. It's fine. It's just a very flawed movie. But he actually has this thing where he basically becomes Michael Myers. Like, this guy will not die. And they never say anything about the serum making him superhuman. They should have, but they don't. So when he gets lit on fire, which seems to just kind of irritate him, I mean, full body burn, this guy should be crippled in pain, and he's pretty much walks it off. But I'm not kidding. Then what else do they do to him? He gets electrocuted. Then he comes back after being electrocuted to stalk him in this elevator. It's at that point, this is just stupid. This doesn't make any sense. How is this guy still alive? But I don't know. Josh Brolin is also pretty superhuman. He gets stabbed in the stomach, and then he's fine. 10 minutes later, he looks like he's dying, and then he just kind of like, I walked it off. I'm fine. I'm Josh Brolin. I'm gonna star. I'm gonna be Thanos, and I'm gonna be Deadpool too. I'm good. The elevator sequence is pretty cool once you get past how stupid it is. With the elevator, it blows up, and then it kind of crashes back down on him. That's a good stunt sequence. It's intense. It's well shot. It's actually one of the more well shot parts of the whole movie. Kevin Bacon shouldn't have been in it. They didn't need him to come back again. They could have just been evading the damn elevator. But yeah, overall, I like this flick. There's a director's cut, which isn't a director's cut. That was during the kind of late 2000s DVD boom when they would just reinsert deleted scenes and call it a director's cut until some director, I actually think it was the director of Donnie Brasco, sued because he said, this is not a director's cut. I did not okay this. You just put scenes that we decided to delete back into the movie, then resold it to people. So the director's cut isn't a director's cut. There's a straight-to-DVD sequel starring Christian Slater from Mr. Robot as this soldier who takes the Hollow Man serum. And it wasn't a very good movie. Christian Slater wasn't actually in it that much, and that sounds funny because he's invisible, but I mean, even then, he's not in it that much.
Sebastian? Are you in here?
And I do like that this movie has a score. This is one of the... today we don't get film scores. We don't get memorable scores. Scores are just kind of background noise. They're forgettable. But this is a score that you will remember. It has a melody. It matters. It's a real piece of music. It's not just doom 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 doom, just background noise like every Marvel movie. It's just background. There's no Marvel movie has memorable scores anymore. They just have that one piece of music they play over everything. So I mean, this isn't a flawless movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's fine. It's just either the script needed work, it needed better sets, it needed better production design. It's just a B movie that was made for $100 million. So yeah, it could have and should have been better with the level of talent involved, but we got what we got, and I enjoy this movie. I go back to it every so often. It's one of Verhoeven's lesser movies, but it's certainly not as bad as Showgirls. It's better than Basic Instinct even. It's fine.